I have it up.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. It's on my personal timeline, not in my Safran Consulting. Okay, so I think we are live, and we are going to receive attendees shortly. And there is one attendee.
Yeah, I got it.
We're good, we're there? Okay, awesome. Okay, so attendees, please go ahead and as you arrive, say where you're calling in from. We'll be starting in just a couple minutes, so we've got some early folks. And then, yeah, this is great. Yay, we have people here from San Diego. Thank you. Hola from San Diego. I love it. Hola, ¿cómo están? And yeah, we'll just wait just a few minutes. It's not quite 4 o'clock yet. And air quality. Oh, up here in Oakland, air quality. I did not go outside today. So the question was, how is air quality? How is it in San Diego? How is the air quality in San Diego? The commentator, attendee person. I don't say people's names, just so you know, Caress, when I'm looking at the chats and the questions, unless they say it's okay to say their name, I don't usually say it. Yeah,
It's a lovely bit of consent.
Right, exactly. Air quality today in Oakland, it's not showing actually. Oh, it's moderate. 78 is the air quality index. And last night it was like 87. So I've just been staying inside. Yeah, so, all right, it is 4 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who are here in the webinar as attendees where your voices and faces aren't obvious to us, but you can chat. You can also use the Q&A to ask questions. Those of you who are on the Facebook Live, you can also comment or put questions in, and Jody, my girlfriend, will be paying attention to those comments and questions and then providing them back to me, to herself, or to Caress, whoever can address those. And we are happy to hear from any of you. If you have questions, you have experiences, you have concerns, you have fears, please feel free to just type away. We just want you to feel comfortable to be here in the way that you need to be. So just brief introductions. My name is Misha Safran, and I created this candid conversation about systemic racism shortly after the murder of George Floyd. I had a lot of disdain for our country, as well as frustration and anger, and as an empath and highly sensitive person, nausea. I was pretty sick. I let it get into my body quite a bit. And so the way to get it out of my body was to stand up and speak out. And as an educator of 30 years, decided that these webinars were a way for me to create a platform, not necessarily for me to speak out, but for me to stand up and allow the microphone to be handed to those who really should have the microphone right now. So I am joined every single webinar by my beautiful girlfriend, Jody Lewis. So I want to just give a little info, but I'll let Jody introduce herself. And then I'm also joined by Caress Fitch, who is our quote unquote panelist for this evening. And yeah, this is just, I'm so excited about tonight. So Jody Lewis is an attorney who, actually, you know what, you would do more justice. I can just say how beautiful and wonderful and sweet and compassionate, intelligent and talented you are, but that would be potentially biased. I don't know. I'm usually pretty direct and honest. But Jody, why don't you introduce yourself, and then I do have an introduction prepared for Caress. So tell us who you are, Jody.
Yes, I am an attorney. I work for a nonprofit organization. I'm actually the legal director there, and we provide services for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. So obviously there's a lot of overlap with gender violence and racial violence. So it's an issue that I spent a lot of my career on, and I'm happy to be here. These webinars have been really important for me. I recognize that I am a woman, a white woman. I have a lot of privilege, and I don't always recognize that privilege every day, so I'm on a learning curve myself to make this world a better place.
Thank you. Yeah, in fact, when I was visiting Jody this summer, we were doing something and we were going to be reading a book together and decided that we were thinking we wanted to do something else because it felt so uncomfortable. I'm like, you know what? Well, we need to be uncomfortable. And we changed our plans back to the reading that we were going to do because Black people don't get the choice to be comfortable or uncomfortable on a daily basis. So it was like this really conscious choice, like, damn it, we're going to get uncomfortable. That's just the way it's going to be. And we were glad that we did, even though it was painful. It was really hard. It was when we were going to attend the confronting woman whitehood or something like that. I can't even remember now. But Heather Marie Scholl, who was my guest last time. But we did, we got through it and it was uncomfortable. And that's what I would like to encourage people to do, is get uncomfortable. Not that you'll ever really know the exact experience of anybody. For example, me with chronic pain, nobody can say, oh, I totally understand how you feel. No, you don't. And that's okay. It's just saying that you do makes it worse because you don't. So I want to introduce our guest for tonight. Super excited, Caress Fitch. Thank you so much. Caress uses she, they pronouns and has been coaching and consulting for 25 years, focusing on relationship coaching for the past 5 years. She is a principal coach and co-founder of Mindful Passions International. She is also a founding member and consultant at Wild Authentic Mindfulness, a conscious consulting collective. And I met Caress through the Conscious Girlfriend because she was a guest speaker for our community, and that was wonderful with Ruth Schwartz. Caress is a proud Black, queer, disabled, non-monogamous leather girl who advocates for BIPOC, LGBTQ+, poly, kink, and disabled communities in every aspect of her life and work. And I'll be putting her description as well as her website. Actually, I have and her website into the chat for the attendees. We'll also put it on the Facebook page for those of you who would like. I think I put it there already, actually. And so Caress, with that introduction, without further ado, I'd love to have you speak up, say hello, say whatever you want to say at this point. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Misha and Jody. And we're all a little bit uncomfortable today, and I'm going to invite all of you to step into a little bit more discomfort with me, because I'm going to share some experiences with you about microaggressions. A lot of folks are hearing a lot about microaggressions these days, and really, it's not being passive aggressive. So here's a PSA for any people of color who may be on the call. If you are experiencing microaggressions, don't let them slide. And for everyone on the call, if you witness a microaggression, don't let it slide. So let me roll things back just a little bit. And first, what is a microaggression? Well, you could say that it's that death by 1,000 cuts. Those little things that don't kill you outright or actually cause bodily harm, but still hurt. And they usually come in 4 different ways. And I've experienced all of them. Every single one. For example, I was riding the bus when I lived in Denver on my way to work, commuting. This was back when I had been locked for about 15 years. I wore my hair in dreadlocks, and they were down to about the middle of my back. And as I was sitting there on the bus in my morning commute, reading a book, someone reached out and grabbed my hair and pulled it a little to touch and feel it. But I didn't consent to that. That was a micro-assault. That was a deliberate action, a deliberate invasion of my space. And it happened because I'm Black. Can't tell you how many times that's happened. I know I'm not the only person that it's happened to. As a matter of fact, it's happened to my mother so many times that eventually I bought her a shirt that says, "Yes, you can touch my hair for $5." Because she was just irritated with all the people that kept asking her this question and continue to ask her this question.
And don't ask the question.
Hmm?
And those who don't ask the question.
Yes, and those who don't ask the question, which happens more often than not. This is a microaggression my kids have experienced. People just randomly reaching out and touching their hair, or when they were babies, touching their lips. Oh, their lips are so big. That's not okay. That's not okay. Okay. It's hurtful, but it's not a thing that put me in the hospital. It's not a thing that put me into any major physical injury. So it's a microaggression. That's the micro assault. Micro insults. These are the ones that come up all the time, and people will say, oh, that's just free speech. It's just an opinion. Doesn't really matter. But when the micro insult looks like someone telling me at a job interview, oh, I'm really impressed with how articulate you are. That sends a very clear message that there was an expectation that I would be less intelligent. And the first time I heard that particular one, I was 6 years old. And it came on the tail of my teacher questioning whether or not I actually knew how to read after I'd sat and held an independent story circle with the other kids in my class that didn't want to hear the book that she was reading. She invalidated my intelligence and my ability to read, this micro invalidation, by saying, oh, I bet you just memorized that whole book. Because she had never had a 6-year-old in her class who was Black. This was a kindergarten class. I have a January birthday, so I got to wait and start school late. She'd never had an incoming Black student who was able to read. This was outside of anything that she had ever experienced, so she didn't believe that it could possibly be true. Yeah. The other very common micro-invalidation that I'm seeing more in social media these days is we're beyond race. We have a post-racial community now, which completely denies the fact that I experience the world differently than people who are not Black. Now, granted, I'm not saying I have all of the oppression in the world. I would never presume to go that far. I have multiple privileges, as well as the oppression that comes from being a queer, Black, disabled woman in this country. I have the privilege that both of my parents are still living. I have the privilege of being a homeowner. I have the privilege and protection of being in a marital relationship. I have the privilege that comes with having a college degree. But I am still oppressed at the same time. Sometimes my privilege gets me into a little bit of trouble, particularly when I'm dealing with systems that are designed to serve multiple people, like the medical system. The day that I realized systemic racism was much bigger than I'd ever imagined was a day that I took my entire family to our primary care doctor. We each had independent appointments, but we all were dealing with a case of bronchitis. We had all got it roughly in the same 3 days. We all started showing symptoms in roughly the same 3 days. We all needed medication. So I took all of us, husband, 3 kids, myself, all to the same doctor. And I assumed that because we all had the same thing, we lived in the same house, we were breathing the same germy air, that we would all have been treated exactly the same way. And I didn't realize how wrong I was until I got to the pharmacy to pick up the prescriptions that we'd all been written. My husband, who was a white man, received very strong antibiotics and a cough syrup that had pain reliever in it so that he could sleep at night and rest easily while he recovered. My stepson, also white, received the same very strong prescription, because this was a bacterial strain of bronchitis, and the same cough medicine with pain relief. My youngest son, who has asthma, received a less potent antibiotic and nothing to control the cough. It was suggested, though, that he should use his inhaler a little bit more. My other son received the same antibiotic that my youngest son received, and also nothing for the cough. I received this shorter course of antibiotics as well, nothing for the cough, and it was suggested to me that if I felt I was in pain, that perhaps I should take some Tylenol. Now, a few days go by, and my youngest son starts really getting worse, and I had to take him to the emergency room. And the very first medication that he was given in the emergency room was the same cough medicine with pain relief that had been prescribed from my husband and my stepson. I'm still reeling about that. And this is something that happened 12 years ago. But every time I have to encounter structural systems, this is what I deal with. This is what people who look like me deal with. One of the things that feeds this systemic racism is environmental microaggressions. These are these little concepts, these little things that just happen that are ingrained in our society. When that primary care doctor went to medical school, he very likely had the belief that Black people have either fewer nerve endings than white people, or that their brains process pain differently. Because that question is still being asked of incoming medical students in their first year. And 50% of them consistently over the years have said that they believe this. And it's astounding, because by the time they've hit their first year of medical school to be asked this question, they've already had 4 years of pre-med, which has included anatomy and physiology. And the anatomy and physiology textbooks are not segregated by race. You have human anatomy and physiology, yet somehow this idea persists. A little bit more tangible way of talking about an environmental microaggression, something that a lot of folks may have noticed in their jobs, especially if you work in a corporate environment, where you go into the suite where all of the executives have their offices, and you get to see the picture of the board, all the members of the board, and to be able to see the pictures of all the folks involved with the history of building the company. And most of these companies are now taking very, very active actions to be more diverse in their hiring practices. And I've seen HR directors get really, really excited. We have a candidate of color, and she's female. We're so excited. We hope she takes the job. And at least 4 times in the last 20 years, I have seen these potential candidates come in, and while they're sitting and waiting in the office for the time of their interview, you see them watching all the pictures on the walls seeing all of these faces of people who look nothing like them. And the wheels start to turn with the wondering, how well am I actually going to fit in here? Is this really going to be a safe place for me to be? And 4 times in 20 years, granted, I don't always see all of the hiring processes, I have seen candidates get up and leave before their scheduled interview because the space no longer seemed as safe and welcoming. All of the right words were said on the phone interview. All of the correct information about being an equitable and diverse company was communicated in the process leading up to the interview. But when you actually get to the place and you sit and see there's nobody here that looks like me, it really makes you wonder, am I going to be valued here? Were all of the things that I was told made up and they're just now starting down this journey? Am I going to be the only Black person in this company? And I've been there. I've been there multiple times, too many times to count. The only Black person, and oftentimes the only woman, through my entire corporate career. And it's really hard in that environment to address a microaggression when it happens to me. Because now I've got to contend with the idea that people are going to think that I'm just being overly sensitive, or that I'm looking for special treatment. And I'm not looking for special treatment. I just want fair treatment. That's all. Just fair treatment. I don't think that I'm asking too much to have expected during that career to have been compensated the same way my male colleagues were compensated. I don't think that I was expecting too much to have expected my workspace to have been treated with the same degree of respect as other people's workspaces. Even though I had a guest chair, most people would come and just sit on my desk. How's that okay? I didn't sit on their desks when I went to visit them in their offices. They didn't sit on the desks of my white colleagues. Yet somehow, people seemed to think it was okay to treat me differently. So I'm going to pause for a moment and check in and see if we've had any questions come in.
I have one actually, and if there are some, Jody, you'll let us know. When you talked about not looking for fair treatment, there was still is a huge controversy around affirmative action. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I can speak to my perception of the experience. Yes. I have been called the affirmative action token. I have been called the affirmative action token, especially since when we do the demographic surveys in a corporate environment, I get to check a lot of boxes. Black, disabled, female, I get to check a lot of boxes. So I've often been referred to as the diversity hire, which frankly is a horrible term, because I would much rather be a qualified hire. That's it. Affirmative action, in my opinion, and this is only my opinion, seems to skew hiring departments to not look for the best qualified candidate who meets the requirements of the position, who also happens to be from a marginalized community. In my experience, when I have known that someone was hired specifically because they checked a specific demographic box, there was not enough attention paid to how well that person was able to do the job, which ultimately set that individual up for failure in the position. And then that furthers this narrative that people of color are not intelligent.
Yeah.
It's a sticky spot. I understand the desire to want to have a workforce that reflects the community the company is based in or the organization is based in. I understand that. But it's really hard to make that happen when so many of the things that are required for positions, especially for senior level positions, are things that are not easily attainable by people of color and particularly by Black people. Companies that make a point of saying, well, we only hire college graduates. Okay, that's awesome. And do you have a scholarship program to assist people who would otherwise be good candidates for this position but are lacking a college degree to help them get that education if they were not able to get it otherwise? Because not everyone has a family that has a history of going to university. Not everyone has the ability to attend school in a school district that will adequately prepare them for the universities that are being preferred by the employers. Not everyone has the money to pay for tuition.
Yeah.
So that requirement alone creates an inequitable situation.
Especially when you have somebody who's probably been in the field for 17 years, has had plenty of experience, but hasn't necessarily gone to college to get it.
Exactly.
I mean, I have a lot of friends who are self-taught in a lot of different disciplines, but if they make the requirement of college, that they'll never get the job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. They'll never get the job. And there are some industries that are moving in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
A dear friend of mine got into Black wellness by way of getting a doula certification because her desire was to be an obstetric nurse, but she didn't have the academic standing to be able to be accepted into nursing school. And that takes us into a whole other situation where when you look at how Black children are treated in elementary school, you'll often find that Black children are treated more harshly than any other demographic. And this friend of mine is a girl with attention deficit disorder, and hers presented as hyperactivity as a very small child. So she was that rowdy Black girl who couldn't stay in her seat. So from kindergarten on, her education record was filled with comments about her inappropriate behavior and disruptiveness in class, and lots of incidences of being sent to the principal's office because she was unruly. And that made her a poor fit for the university track in her school district. She wasn't even offered the classes in high school that would have prepared her to go to nursing school.
Yeah.
And you know what? She is an amazing doula.
I'm a doula too. I never share that, but it's such a wonderful gift. And it is, I mean, it's so amazing. I'm glad that she had an option. I mean,
Yes.
that is also, what really stifles so much of the community is there aren't as many options. And yeah.
Yeah. So she found a way to make it work. And I'll be honest, members of the Black community are tired of finding a way.
Right.
So many of the things that we do, when we see a Black person who is highly accomplished. The rest of the world doesn't take into consideration all of the things that had to happen in order for this person to achieve what they achieved. And it's tough. It is tough. We, as a community, the Black community, we are more likely, and I'm going to use a dated term, to have latchkey children because both parents are working, or a single parent is working and kids are home alone and unsupervised. And there's so much trouble that can be gotten into. You know, most of my family members that joined gangs didn't join gangs because they wanted to be criminals. They joined gangs because they didn't want to sit at home by themselves for 6 hours waiting on mom to get home from work. Because mom worked a day job and then had a 30-minute break for her dinner while she was commuting to her night job.
I just finished reading the book by Patrice Colors, When They Call You a Terrorist. And she really dives into that topic. You know, these kids from very young are in the driveway or alleyway of their apartment building and constantly being picked up by police.
Yes.
Assaulted by police, questioned by police. There aren't services and opportunities for them to do anything else.
There are not.
Yeah, but if anybody who's listening or watching, it's an amazing book. Patrice Colors is one of the people who founded Black Lives Matter.
Thank you so much for bringing that topic up, because it is such a big deal. Yeah. For those of us, because I was a latchkey family as well. Both of my parents worked. And I was odd because I went to the library. I hung out in the library instead of hanging out on the corners with my cousins. And there has actually been backlash against me for that.
From your family?
From my family, yes. Yes, they got this idea that I must think I'm better than they are because I'm too good to hang out in the street. No, I just value my safety. I value my safety. And that valuing my safety has led me to make all kinds of compromises in my world, including down to the choice of what kind of car I drive. You know, my previous career, I was a software engineer. I made really good money. And I drove Hyundais and Kias. Because the one time a friend loaned me his vehicle, it was a Porsche Boxster, convertible, beautiful car, because I was considering buying one. I could afford it, why not? Would have been a lot of fun. And in the 2 blocks that I was driving this car so that I could decide if I wanted to buy one, I was followed by police for half a block and then pulled over. No taillights were out, no problems with the registration, had plenty of insurance. I was pulled over because I was a Black woman driving a Porsche Boxster. And because I know that when I am legitimately pulled over by the police, it's gonna be for speeding. It's gonna be for speeding. You know, I learned how to drive in Japan. It's gonna be for speeding. And I really, I really don't
Slow down,
want.
girl. I think you were telling me that a week ago. Misha, slow down. Take care of yourself.
I was. That's right. Well, for the record, it's been 15 years since I got a speeding ticket.
Because you have it. Okay.
Well, and it's only been 3 years that I don't drive regularly. So,
Okay. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I don't know what I was just reading. Oh, well, I'm reading so many things. I don't even remember everything, but I think that it's not, well, I mean, Sandra Bland and I mean, there are a lot of other, I mean, people get pulled over all the time for the most
they do.
ridiculous.
They get pulled over
All
and
of those
it can go really sideways really quickly.
Yeah.
And, you know, I drive less expensive cars just because I don't want to add that assumption that I am a car thief to whatever else is going on through the officer's mind. Because the last thing I want to be dealing with is the question of, where did you get this car? And okay, I have been pulled over and this happened. The question was not just, where did you get this car? It wasn't even, ma'am, is this your car? It was, girl, whose car is this?
What?
Yes. Yes. And oddly enough, you know, it took a really long time for the officer to finish running my license, my registration, confirming that I did in fact have insurance. He came back to the car a couple of times to ask me multiple times where I lived, looking for a reason to be able to pull me in.
So in the book, I was trying to think of it, in the book Eloquent Rage, she talks about that. And I was just reading from the ACLU that so it says the burden of de-escalation does not fall on the citizen. It's the law enforcement that is supposed to, behave.
Right.
And that one sentence, girl, where'd you get this car or whatever, I already forgot because I was so shocked.
Yes.
That is not de-escalation.
That's not.
An immediate provocation.
Yes. Yes. And you notice that my response has been to de-escalate my entire life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was so excited the first year I realized I was going to clear 6 figures in my salary, and I wanted to buy myself a luxury car to celebrate. I really did. And I couldn't, because I needed to know that regardless, I was going to be able to make it home to my children.
Or that you and your children were going to make it home safe and alive. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. All your personal stories are, I mean, they're painful. And for you, of course, and I'm sure for our listeners and for me and Jody, it's yeah, I mean, I'm a bit speechless. I think when we were having a conversation last week, I said, I'm sorry. And you said, no, it's not. And I was like, no, I'm sorry for your pain. I'm sorry for the experiences that you are living with on a daily basis.
Thank you. It has been an interesting journey and will continue to be an interesting journey. And despite all of the things that I've shared just in this call, in my mind, me being Black wasn't really even a big deal until I moved to Atlanta a few years back.
Really?
You know, growing up in Southern California, it was just a demographic checkbox. The only thing anyone was really concerned with was, are you Hispanic or are you not Hispanic? Because that was the term then. And since I always checked the not Hispanic box, they never thought anything about it. You know, decades of living in Central Texas, the same kind of thing. The only demographic people were concerned with racially was whether or not you are Latinx or Hispanic. And yes, Janine, some of the checkboxes do still say that. In Austin, Texas, they have started expanding. Some of them now say Latinx/Hispanic/ of Iberian descent, I think is the other one I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And all of a sudden, living in Atlanta, I was in a city surrounded by more Black people than I had ever seen before. wow, this is really interesting. And that's when I had to start confronting my own internalized racism. There was a day that there was an interstate in Atlanta that actually had a pretty significant overpass in an area where multiple interstates joined. And the topmost layer collapsed. And it was in the track of my commute to my job. And so my job suggested that everyone take the train instead of driving. Fine, not a problem. I get up, go to the train station, and I'm riding the train going to work. I have to go from the south side of Atlanta all the way past the north end of Atlanta on this train ride. And I noticed that when a lone black man got on the train at one of the stops, without even realizing what I was doing, I grabbed my laptop bag and pulled it a little bit closer to me.
Wow.
I'm black, and I was afraid that this unknown black man was going to harm me or steal my laptop. And I had to confront my own internalized racism.
Yeah.
And that's a shame. When I can't even look at people who look like me and just revel in the fact that there are people who look like me in the world. Instead, I was worried that he was going to hurt me or take my stuff. How wrong is that?
How do you confront that though? What did you do, or what are you doing?
I went to therapy.
Bravo.
Yeah. I went to therapy because I realized I had no idea that there was that much internalized racism. And it was a process of peeling back the layers of this onion and figuring out and identifying all of the little racist comments that my parents had made. Remembering that when I asked my mom when I was 13 years old if I could wear dreadlocks, because I'd seen them in a magazine. They were so pretty and just so majestic looking. And the words she said to me were, "Not as long as you live in my house, because that looks too black." A microaggression from my mom, who, in case you can't tell, is black.
Well, unless you were adopted, we didn't know, but yeah.
True, true, yes.
I was going to ask, wait, was your mom black? But yeah.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah. But yes, my mom is black, my dad's black, but my mother has such a lighter skin tone than I do that until I was in second grade, I was convinced she was white. I had no information to tell me otherwise. Her skin was as light as yours is, Misha. And I didn't know that that was unusual in any way until the night that we were going out to dinner when we lived in South Carolina to celebrate my father having gotten a promotion. He had finally gotten a promotion. He was no longer an airman. This was a big deal. And we were going to go and have a nice dinner to celebrate. And the first restaurant we went into, we were seated at a really bad table by the kitchen. The swinging door in and out of the kitchen would hit the table every time a white person went in or out. So we didn't stay, because that's really not acceptable. That's not okay. The next restaurant we went to, my father was parking the car, and my father has very, very dark skin. So my mother and my sisters and I went in. And my sisters are also both very light-skinned, like my mother. I'm the only dark one in the bunch. We walked in, and it wasn't really a maitre d'. The restaurant wasn't that fancy, but the I'm not sure what to call him. Host. Yes, the host. At the host stand said, "We can seat you in just a moment, ma'am." Gave me a really disapproving look. And since my mother was wearing her hair straight, I'm assuming that he thought my mom was Latinx. Fine, whatever. And that she ended up with this random black child. Fine. As soon as my father walked through the door and put his hand on the small of my mother's back, we were told that the restaurant was full, that there were no seats available.
Where was this?
Myrtle Beach, South Carolina.
I mean,
Yeah.
not asking because it wouldn't happen anywhere else, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, but just to give a little context, yeah.
Yeah.
We did end up being able to get some dinner that night. We went to 4 restaurants total. The 5th restaurant did not turn us away, but the 5th restaurant was McDonald's. And at that point, we just needed to eat. I was 6. My younger sisters were 2 and 3.
Mm-hmm.
We got dinner at 9:30 that night. My bedtime was 8.
So much for celebrating a promotion.
So much for celebrating a promotion. Yeah.
I noticed, Jody, you unmuted. Did you have a question?
It was a while back, so.
That's okay. We're going with the flow, but you know.
We are.
Yeah, I don't know because there was so much. Yeah, I was just taking some notes, but I was a little scattered.
Well, let me just clarify, because you did touch on the microaggressions and the different levels, and I was writing them in the chat, and then Jody added the last one, and I don't know if you saw them, if we got them all.
Yes.
The micro-assaults, micro-insults, micro-invalidations, and environmental microaggressions.
You got them all.
Okay. Could we maybe, I don't know if there are people that are listening, either in the Facebook, watching in Facebook, or listening here in the webinar, if you all would be willing to, I keep typing the word. Oh, it's okay. I never marked that this was not explicit. So this person said, I keep typing the word fuck in capital letters in the text box, but don't want to be so vulgar. You know what? Yeah, it is. It's exactly when we hear experiences like this. And thank you. Yes. Type it in
yes, Janine.
letters.
Thank you.
Now
all
been
caps.
typed in. Fuck. And I'm assuming that this is in response to the stories that you're hearing from Caress, that the way they were treated at the restaurant and the other stories that have been provided. Yes, absolutely. Yes. Okay. Thank you. I had a feeling, just wanted to clarify, because I want to make sure that we're giving the right attention to the right, the right fuck to the
That's right.
So I was curious, for the people who are watching in the Facebook or here on the webinar, if you've ever experienced a microaggression, whether a micro insult, micro invalidation, environmental, micro assault, or if you feel like maybe at some point in time you have been the giver of a microaggression, we'd love to hear from you, just what your awareness is and what your thoughts are. And then perhaps we could give a few more examples of each of those, and wait for people to make comments and see what comes in. How do you feel?
Oh, sure thing. Sure thing. Oh my goodness. This is where it gets to be difficult, because my life has just had so many of these instances occur that trying to pick out one specific one to talk about is really hard sometimes.
Well, I have one I know you can start with.
Yes.
I remember from the other night, the micro invalidation around somebody's name.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
If you're okay with sharing that one again. Because
yes.
All of us, especially as an educator of 30 years, that's been like a really important part for me as I've grown, to ask students, I'm not sure I'm going to say this right. I'm going to give it my best shot, but will you please correct me? Because as a world language teacher, French and Spanish, you would think that I would have some kind of condescendence and compassion around how, culturally sensitive, how names are important to people. So that was the way I would always approach it, but I still would feel uncomfortable if I said it wrong. But I know that there's some people who don't even ask, some people who don't even say the name, or they say it and never question whether it was. So I gave a little intro. Back to you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my goodness. Okay, do we start with Quintarian, who was in my 4th grade class, and the day that we had a substitute teacher who said, Quinn, you know who you are.
Yeah, you start with that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or, the little girl whose name was Shaniqua, and she was a little girl at a daycare center I worked at, and I watched in horror as another staff member looked at just the first few letters and referred to this child as Shanene. And when Shaniqua's mother corrected this other staffer, she was really blown off. It's like, well, you know who I was talking about. Words have value. Names have meaning and power. And even if we don't know anything else about a person, the least we can do is give them the respect of saying their name properly, or at least even trying and owning it when we fuck it up.
We're fuck again. We're on a roll now.
We are.
Keep going. The attendee was like, yes. Don't show this to your students, Janine. Okay. Yeah. And all people do it, though. It's all people do it. I mean, I think you had an experience yourself where was it a coworker or that you shared?
It's happened multiple times. It's happened multiple times. I think the most notable examples have been all the times that extra syllables have been added to my name. Because at that point, I'm wondering, are you even looking? What exactly is going on here? Exactly is going on here?
Well, just with my last name, people say San Fran. Like I do live near San Francisco, but it's not San Fran. And when I was married, my married name, my boys have the last name Doig, and people would say Doug. They would say Doing. They would say Doing. Like, where are you getting this extra letter from?
Yes.
Instead of just asking. How do you pronounce that?
My children. Well, let me run on here for a second. My children's last name is Scrutch. That was my last name for years. I was called Scrunk, Scrooch, Scratch, Scrunch, Scruck. Like, well, okay. Oh, and Shruck. Shruck, completely changing the first 2 letters. That interesting.
Would these be considered a micro insult or a micro invalidation? Or both?
When it has been done deliberately, I consider it an insult.
Okay.
Because I knew at the time that there were people who were deliberately mispronouncing my name to try and get under my skin.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. But when it was blown off, when I would correct the pronunciation, whatever, you know what I'm talking about, or yeah, we communicated about that. That's an invalidation. That's me being told that it doesn't really matter that my name was pronounced incorrectly. And it's of such little value that they're not even going to try.
So when people say blue lives matter, all lives matter,
you can see you're hurting me, right?
It doesn't feel so micro. I mean, the fact that we're defining micro, macro, but it doesn't. Yeah, the panelist just said another fuck.
Yes.
Right, but I mean I think what's frustrating for me is when I hear the word microaggression, it's as if it's something tiny, which you talked about, tiny cuts, because they build up and it really starts to hurt, right?
Yes.
But I think there's this misconception that microaggressions aren't so damaging.
Oh my goodness.
Accurate.
That is so inaccurate. Microaggressions are like any other form of trauma, and repeated exposure to them can cause anxiety, depression, sleep difficulties, diminished confidence, feeling like you're an imposter, feeling helpless, not having any motivation, and having all the thoughts of, did I hear that right? And am I making this a big deal? All those self-doubting thoughts, the intrusive cognitions, as they say. Yeah, and to touch on one of the things that I touched on at Conscious Girlfriend. There is this medical myth in the US that Black people have a genetic predisposition to high blood pressure. High blood pressure
Most of their
is
neighborhoods.
a stress-related illness, stress-related illness. And somehow, you know, I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not even a sociologist. I'm just a person who tries to have a little bit of common sense. And it occurs to me that if every single Black person on the planet just has a genetic tendency towards high blood pressure, that the entire continent of Africa would be in a health crisis. That we would be hearing more and more and more about how Black people in Africa are just falling over dead from strokes and heart attacks because of this high blood pressure. We would be hearing that the national health systems in Germany and the UK and other countries that have Black populace would be treating this as a major health initiative to protect the lives of this vulnerable population.
Yeah.
But that's not happening.
Right.
There has to be a reason that it's not happening. And when we add to this idea that there has been research done on the stress levels and allostatic loads and high blood pressure and other measures of stress and recovery done on willing participants, thankfully, who have immigrated from African nations to the US. And we see that within one generation of these families moving to the US, they then have the same health outlook as people whose whose ancestors were stolen. They arrive with perfectly normal vitals, perfectly normal, and within a few years start to develop high blood pressure.
Yeah.
How is that a genetic thing? How?
No, it's just an excuse from a system that is racist.
Which is why I classified it as a medical myth.
Yep.
At the beginning of all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things that I have a friend who was going to Mills College, and she was doing a project on creating food resources rather than convenience stores in a lot of the impoverished neighborhoods, because that also contributes to the health and well-being of Black people. And in a lot of Black neighborhoods, all they have are those little convenience stores with very little produce.
Yes.
Very little, you know, good food. So that also contributes, right? So there need to be more. So yeah, I mean, to say it's genetic is absolutely a misnomer.
It is. It is definitely a misnomer. And Black communities are a lot more susceptible to finding themselves in food deserts. And it's not just the stores that are there. It's so many things about this. So many things about it. When you look at the fact that many of my family members cannot buy fresh produce without being on WIC or food stamps because they only make enough money to be able to afford McDonald's and SpaghettiOs. Whole, fresh foods are more expensive than the convenience foods that are contributing to these health issues.
Absolutely. Yeah. Someone wrote in the comments, Black people are predisposed, but by their experience rather than their genetics.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So yes, predisposed, but it is not a genetic predisposition.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. It is heavy stuff.
Howard, what are you
And
doing to take care of you?
well, I have a wonderful dinner coming up this evening, and I am spending as much of my weekend as possible watching the digital version of Dragon Con that we're having this weekend since I can't travel to Atlanta.
Wait, what's Dragon Con?
Oh, okay. Well, okay, here is a little misnomer.
Okay.
There are Black comic book and sci-fi geeks, and
Oh,
I am one of them.
I know that. Maybe I'm the only one that knows that.
There are very few numbers. There are very few numbers. I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good. I'm glad that that was the more immediate, what are you taking care of yourself? But,
Yes.
in the climate and in the way that things are progressing. And I know somebody also talked about sharing more about your experiences in Atlanta. Yeah, just overall, like as an individual who is Black, who is marginalized, who is lesbian or queer, excuse me, who is, you've got a lot of definitions that can contribute to being marginalized, right? What do you do, and how do you and your family and your community take care of yourselves?
Oh my goodness.
If you
This
can
is
also
why
share.
Black church is such a big deal. I
Yeah.
don't go personally. But growing up in a Black church gave me this idea that resting is an important thing for me to do as a Black person living in the US. That I absolutely have to have one day out of every week where I do nothing that does not care for and nourish myself. The other thing that I have done as I have gotten older and, not being able to get to houses of worship and things like that, and finding just I don't care for the politics there, the other thing that has helped is actually having what I call a daily pleasure practice. Where I find some kind of pleasure. It's not always, physical pleasure. It could be an intellectual pleasure. It could be the sensual pleasure of eating a really good meal. But I do something to give myself a sense of pleasure every single day. And when my nervous system really just can't take it anymore, yeah, I wrap myself up in a weighted blanket and I hide in a dark room for a while.
Cry in the
Listening to music that makes me cry.
Yeah. Okay, I can relate. Thank you for being very honest. Yeah.
Yes.
But even that is self-care, because you're
It
allowing
is. It
you're allowing
is.
feelings to be present.
It's challenging to do though, because as a Black woman, there's an expectation from my community that I'm going to be strong and I'm going to work hard. And those are ideas that make it really hard for me to be vulnerable and to need to be cared for.
Yeah. Like you're supposed to be some example all the time.
Yeah.
I
I
think
am not Superwoman.
women in general already have that expectation, and then you add on the cultural and the racial.
Yeah. And the cultural expectation is there because Black women are still having children and Black men are still being killed or incarcerated, and somebody has to raise the kids. So in a community that is largely filled with families with absent fathers, I'm in a little bit of an aberration. My father was present my entire childhood. Not only present, but in the home with my mother. It's odd. Privilege.
Actually, and that reminds me, in the book, So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Oluo, she talks about her and her friends having had this gathering and realizing when a couple of young Black men came along, they also had their own internal racism, like they don't belong here. And it wasn't her wording. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, I think in depending on what community you're in and how you are raised and where you were brought up, like we do all have internalized messages. I mean, I'm a gay woman and I have internalized homophobia. You know,
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
there's a lot. I was raised Jewish, and I have, you know, because of many years of people telling awful jokes and, you know, making Jews the butt of their jokes. You know, there's some internal anti-Semitism. You know,
Yeah.
so I think what
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier about being willing to face our own internal isms
Yes,
is really critical. And I think this
it
is what
is.
perhaps this new, I don't want to say new movement, this continuation of the movement with the most recent events has really sparked some initiative and desire in people.
I
Hopefully
hope that
it's
it
not a
has.
bubble that bursts that just disappears, but that continues.
Right. I hope it continues. I hope it continues. And I see one of our panelists has asked me to speak a little bit more about my experience in Atlanta.
Yeah,
And
please do.
before I do that, I do want to point out that my experience in Atlanta was an experience of learning about colorism, which I'd only heard in academic terms before actually experiencing it. And colorism, I've heard people describe as black on black racism. And it's a fairly decent analogy. And the way that showed up for me in my world was, this was while I was still in the software engineering space. I was working at a telecommunications firm. I worked on the top floor of this building. I worked with the executives. I reported directly to an executive. We had a cafeteria in our building, and the executives that I worked with would regularly buy me lunch or breakfast or cater to me in some way as part of our interaction. I referred to them by first name. They referred to me by first name. In this particular cafeteria, 80% of the kitchen staff was Black. And of them, there was one light-skinned woman that I noticed always seemed to be whispering to her coworkers when I came through there. Regardless of which executive I was with, regardless of what day it was, what time of day, she always seemed to have something to say, but never directly to me. This went on for months. One day, I finally heard what she was saying. She said, "Oh, here comes the sedity one." Sedity is a term that's kind of like bourgeois, someone who thinks that they are better than others. I allowed this to go on for months because I recognized that I did not know her entire story. It was clear that there was something that she disliked about me personally, but she didn't know me, just like I didn't know her. It wasn't until months had gone by, I think 6 months, of me receiving this subtle abuse daily, that I finally said something to the kitchen manager. And it's unfortunate, but she was fired that day. And in this process, I learned that she was upset because I have dark skin. I am a dark-skinned Black woman. She is a light-skinned Black woman. And by her thinking, I was out of place because I should not have had a job that put me in contact with executives who were buying me meals and referring to me respectfully by first name. I should have been doing more menial labor than what she was doing. In her mind, she should have had the higher social standing. And as she was leaving, she said, "Well, I'm a single mom and you're taking food out of my kids' mouths." I said, "I'm also a single mom. And you and I just made different choices." "Well, I didn't have an opportunity to go to college." I had an opportunity to go to college, and I ended up not completing, and I went back on my own dime while raising my kids. Again, you and I just made different choices. And that was when I learned, especially in deep South cities like Atlanta, and this did happen in Atlanta, by the way, that there is a perception that, and the phrase is light, bright, and damn near white. That was the phrase. That the lighter the person's skin color is,
Cut out a little bit. Light, white, and what?
damn near white.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That the lighter a person's skin is, the more opportunity they should have in the world. And it goes back to this slave idea of, that when you would go into a slave owner's home, 9 times out of 10, the slaves that were working inside the house were very light-skinned because they were mixed. There was some degree of racial mixing happening. And all of the slaves with really dark skin like mine were out in the field. So this young woman had the idea that because I look like a field hand in her mind, that I should not have had the high-profile, respectful job that I had.
So I have a pretty, it could be a challenging question.
Mm-hmm.
So in the book by Ijeoma Oluo, she talks about, you said we just made different choices. But is it really about making different choices when we talk about the inequity and the different kind of access in our country?
I'm going to argue in this case that it partially is about different choices.
Mm-hmm.
Because despite having both my parents present in the home, despite having had a fairly decent upbringing in terms of financial resources, I didn't have the money to go to school. There was no one standing there with a checkbook saying, here's your tuition.
Mm-hmm. Right.
The first time I went to college, I did it on scholarship, and I did it over my parents' objections.
Mm.
They were actively trying to keep me from going.
Mm. So what kind of choices were you referring to for, and it doesn't have to necessarily be specific to this person, but I was just very taken by what Ijeoma Oluo said in her book, and the fact that again, Black people are predisposed to not having these
Yes.
choices, that there's not really choice for Black people. I mean, she didn't say completely, she didn't say there's no choice.
The choices that I'm talking about are the choices to want it badly enough to keep fighting to get it.
Okay.
Because it was a thing that I wanted so badly.
Yeah.
I fought my parents. I fought the school district.
Mm-hmm.
I fought the admissions board for the university.
Mm-hmm.
I could have just stopped at the first no.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the choice that I made.
Mm-hmm.
The young woman in the cafeteria received some no's in her journey.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, she accepted the no instead of continuing to fight against it.
Yeah.
And I mean, when I say there is a way for many, many things, there was even a teacher at my school, my high school, that was trying to find backdoor ways for me to be able to get into college. Ways that we're not going to rely on the money, we're not going to be so concerned with the disciplinary actions in my academic record because, again, hyperactive Black girl who can't sit down. My story is very similar to my friend's story, the one who became a doula in that regard. Only mine has added to it that I have an attitude
Right.
because when a teacher misquoted something in a textbook and I suggested that perhaps they had given the wrong answer, instead of going to double check what they had misquoted out of the textbook, they doubled down. And my response was, "You're wrong," which somehow is incredibly offensive coming from a fourth grader.
Oh, it's very threatening. Just like you driving a Porsche. Yeah. I mean, it's just, it's part of the white society is to just become very defensive and on the attack, or on the defense.
On the defense. Yeah. 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 And it's been interesting. I mean, I have experienced so many things, and there will be many more experiences, and I refuse to allow them to make me bitter.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm curious because you talked about you have de-escalated I think the quote was de-escalated my entire life, which is really interesting when you're talking about fighting for choice and then de-escalation. Can you talk more about that? Because they're reasons you're doing both, and and at the same time they contradict each other a little bit in some capacities when you look at it, as far as this standing up and speaking out for yourself, but then de-escalating so you keep yourself safe.
Yeah, sure. The keeping myself safe can often mean finding people who are willing to be accomplices for me, to advocate on my behalf. And that goes hand in hand with not accepting that no as a response. Saying, okay, great. You're not going to let me do this. Fine. Let me find someone who's going to advocate for me. And let you tell them no. Let you tell them the real reason that you said no. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen, at least in my experience. I have yet to have one of the people who I've enlisted to advocate for me to come back and say, well, yeah, they're not going to hire you, or they're not going to sign this contract with you because you're Black. Usually I'll get told no, and I push back, keep pushing back, and eventually realize, well, okay, fine, I can't do this on my own. Go get an advocate to come and tell them the exact same things that I've already told them. And they come back with okay, yeah, they're going to do the thing. And I think part of the reason that I'm able to exist in both of those spaces, de-escalating myself and still not accepting the no, is because I don't always try to do everything alone.
Yeah, I think that's a really important piece. Even, I mean, of all races, all backgrounds, people need to remember that we need a team.
Yes.
You know, I know that when my boys decided to go to a local protest, they asked their friends, "Where do you want us to be? Next to you, in front of you, you know, behind you?" Because they knew that their friends probably wouldn't have asked. You know, at the same time, it was not safe for their Black friends to necessarily be at certain protests. So, yeah,
That's
and
right.
I'm grateful that there is this knowledge out there, and I do believe more people need to hear that we can't do this divided. Like, we have to support each other.
We have to support each other. And I have been the very fortunate receiver of so much love from so many people in the world. People who have seen me struggle and have just wanted to be able to help. And it takes bravery when you see someone struggling and this person is clearly independent to step up and say, is there anything I can do? How can I be of service to you?
It takes a lot of bravery to say, yes, please help me do such and such.
It does. That is also true.
Yeah, it's hard to receive help, you know, when we're struggling and we're suffering. And you talked earlier about the racial expectation as a woman, you know, to be this, you know, tough person who just gets through everything. I mean, I think that, again, it's a cultural thing, but it's also a woman thing.
It is. It
So
is. Yeah,
we do need a team. We do need to ask people how we can be of service, and we need to receive the service from people.
we do. We do. And it just being able to receive service and to be able to offer service as well.
Right. Absolutely.
It's incredibly empowering. Incredibly empowering. And I'm just so thankful that because I have reached out to ask for help when I needed it and found people to advocate for me when I needed advocates, that I didn't have to share the same experience my grandmother had. You know,
Yeah.
my grandmother had 10 children. My maternal grandmother had 10 children.
Wow.
Yeah. I asked her once, Grandma, did you mean to have 10 kids? Because I mean, I was 16, I was in my teens. I knew about birth control. I knew that there were ways of controlling how many children you had. I got this concept. And she said, well, no. I said, well, can you explain that? If this is not what you want, how did this happen? If this is not what you wanted, how did this happen? Because in my mind, I was thinking, wow, that's an awful lot of birth control failure. But the reality of it was that birth control was not given to her as an option.
Mhm.
And when birth control pills came out, she asked her doctor, and he said, oh, those are not for Black women.
Ooh,
Yes,
interesting.
yes,
Hmm.
yes.
And she just accepted that answer? Like it was okay? I mean, what did she do with that response?
I think she just accepted that answer. And
That's the medical
there was,
professional and
yeah, it was a medical professional. You know, this was the early 60s. She didn't really have, well, mid 60s, I guess. She didn't really feel like she had any other options. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And I've heard it argued that that mindset goes back to goes back to slavery days. You know, when you wanted your livestock to reproduce because that cut down on how many new slaves you needed to buy. If they're breeding, you don't have to buy new slaves.
Yeah. We just had a few folks come in that don't need to be here. Not really sure how they were able to get on, but yeah. So I'm just gonna pause for a moment and yeah, well, thank you so much. I think we'll come to a close. I'm going to just pause the recording for just a moment and close the room